Welcome to The Wildlife. I'm your host, Devin Boker. In today's episode, I'm joined by the incredibly talented wildlife cinematographer, Jake Davis. We discuss the importance of understanding animal behavior and ecology to capture the perfect shot and effectively tell their stories. We explore the future and potential of artificial intelligence in wildlife filmmaking, the chicken or the egg question of wildlife cinematography, and the challenges of working off-grid. Jake shares his experiences with camera traps, the heart-wrenching decisions of the footage chopping block, and how to craft compelling narratives without words. Growing up, he spent his summers in Jackson Hole, Wyoming, where the Teton Range's jagged peaks and abundant wildlife fostered a deep love for nature and a desire to share and preserve it. Today, while Jake travels the globe to film stories of vulnerable wildlife, the Greater Yellowstone Ecosystem remains his home. As a cinematographer, Jake works on natural history productions for renowned platforms like BBC, National Geographic, Disney, Netflix, Apple. Most recently, he spent 5 months filming snow leopards in Mongolia for the third installment of BBC's famous series, Planet Earth. Jake's work incorporates diverse filming techniques, but he's perhaps best known for his novel approach to filming wildlife with high-tech camera traps. He also created the world's first collection of wildlife ambrotypes. Among his accolades, Jake was a 2019 finalist in the renowned Wildlife Photographer of the Year competition held by the London Natural History Museum, and his work has been displayed at the Smithsonian in the exhibition of nature's best photography. He also has a nature greeting card line sold in stores across the western United States, including REI and the Yellowstone stores. So get ready and join us for an in-depth conversation that highlights a blend of artistry and science required to bring the wild to our screens.
My name is Jake Davis. I go by he, him.
So I always like to start things off by just getting to know our guest a little bit, especially for our audience listening in. What got you into the world of wildlife cinematography? How does one get into that at all?
Yeah, it's a good question. For me, it started just working with wildlife, actually, in still photography. That was the beginning of my career was just working as a still photographer. And I got really interested in telling wildlife stories. And I had a personal project that I was putting a lot of my spare time and whatever money I saved up into filming. And it came to a critical point where I just felt like with still images, I was just not able to convey what I wanted to about that story. And so almost out of necessity, I switched over to doing video work that has kind of carried me to what I'm doing now, which I love. Yeah. And I still do some still photography, but I would say like 90% of my work now is on the video side of things.
Sure. And it looks like, from what I can tell, being a bit of an internet creeper as well, you have done quite a few different things, and like even just recent credit wise. So you have America the Beautiful, you've got Big Beast, that was the Tom Hiddleston narrated one, I believe. America's National Parks and Planet Earth 3. And so these are not just, minor things by any means. Of course, you are aware these are some pretty big name things. Things that I've watched each of these actually on Disney Plus.
Oh, great! Awesome.
Yeah, that is amazing.
Yeah, it's the stuff I grew up watching. It as a kid, it was like I would watch the first Planet Earth when it came out. I can't even tell you how many times I watched that. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I think, for me, it's even, sometimes it's a bit surreal to get to look at what I'm doing and be like, wow, that's crazy. The 10-year-old version of me would have died.
Oh yeah. I can't even imagine.
Yeah, it's a privilege.
You mentioned the motion piece. How still images don't quite capture the full story or the full picture of what's going on or the animal behind it. How does that go into just as far as planning out the kinds of shots that you're going to get, understanding motion or the behavior of the animals?
Well, it's quite a big jump from stills from just doing photography. Because when you're doing photography, you're just looking for just one frame that's just perfect. Right. And so everything you can spend weeks and all you need is 1 second of something. When you get ready to shoot like a sequence, for example, you need, one clip needs to be at least probably 10 seconds to be usable. And so
Sure.
it's just a lot harder.
Yeah.
That was like the first impression I had is like, wow, this is a real challenge.
Yeah.
What I do is I work with a lot of different technologies. I mean, obviously you've seen these shows. We use a lot of different camera technology, from drones to big long lenses to gimbals,
Mm-hmm.
which I do all of that. But my specialty, which was also kind of what got me into the industry, is
Mm-hmm.
working with camera traps. And so
Okay.
they're like really high end, like, like trail cameras that maybe hunters use or people use on their property. But in this case, it's like they're custom built, and then you put like a nice Sony camera inside of it. Um,
Sure.
and so in that case, you're trying to see the motion before it actually happens and set up
Yeah.
accordingly. So that's an entirely different way of thinking.
Yeah. And I imagine that requires, I mean, in and of itself, you have to understand a lot about the wildlife that you are trying to capture in that moment, behavior wise, right?
Yeah, and it's the longer you have to work with a particular species in a particular place, the better, because you just each little bit you learn a little bit, and then you can refine it. And so, like the jobs I've had that have ended up being the best, I've just had a lot of time to work with those animals, and you bring whatever knowledge you have, which helps, and you build up. But there's like for example, snow leopards for Planet Earth.
Mm-hmm.
I had almost 5 months out there, so I had a lot of
Wow.
time to um, kind of figure out what they're doing and then refine it. But it sounds like a lot of time, but when you also realize that a snow leopard might only walk through that site every 6 weeks, it's not that it's not that many chances to refine it.
Yeah. Yeah.
But
Oh,
yeah,
absolutely.
yeah,
Yeah. And I have more questions about the snow leopard stuff, but I guess as a more in general, I know I myself, regularly I'm sitting there watching nature documentaries or even with my students, and they're asking the same kinds of things I'm asking. And I never know, is like, how in the world do you get some of
yeah.
these shots? Some of these shots where it looks so close up and so intimately involved with
Hmm.
the animal. I guess how often are you really that up close and personal with the animal, or is it often very distant?
Hmm. Yeah, it really depends. The closer, the better.
Yeah.
Within reason. Just because when you get far away, it's it doesn't look as good. It's when you can be within maybe at least within 70 yards
Hmm.
of whatever you're working with, you're able to get a lot of different shots.
Yeah.
Um, the camera traps are obviously, that's one way where we can get really close and
Hmm.
wide, and maybe we're talking a few feet from the subject. But
Hmm.
it just depends. When you work with bears, for example, like brown bears in Alaska,
Yeah.
that's a situation where you can be quite close. You can be 5 feet away from them if they decide
Wow.
to walk up to you and sit
Yeah.
down. You would never walk up to one that close, but
Right.
like
Yeah.
once it's kind of established and you're just sitting there still, and if they decide to walk up to you, then that happens.
Yeah.
Obviously, some animals, maybe like a tiger, you're probably not going to be walking with it that close. But we might use other things like a vehicle or something like that.
Hmm. Hmm.
We also have a long lens. The
Yeah.
main
Well,
long lens that we use
yeah.
is a backbreaker, but it's a 50. So if you're familiar with like camera focal lengths,
Hmm.
it's a 50 to 1,000 millimeter, and then
Wow.
there's a flip of a switch, and there's a teleconverter, so it goes to 1,500. So
Wow.
that's the other little secret we have that lets us get close. Like those, even like full frame, like close up of an eye or something like that, while we're
Hmm.
still like reasonably far away, where we can film without maybe being in danger. Or also you're also trying to avoid negatively impacting their behavior. And
Hmm.
so sometimes distance is really important for that, and that's why we use a long lens.
Sure. Sure. You know, one of the most, I mean, probably actually the most powerful thing, aside from the imagery in a lot of these documentaries, is of course the storytelling piece. And I often wonder, watching these through and kind of following the stories, especially when it's like intimately following individual animals, uh,
Hmm.
how much of the storytelling is maybe uh, pieced together in post? You find the shots that kind of fit the narrative, or is it you go out with specific kinds of shots in mind, things to capture to be able to tell a certain story?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's what I it's what I wondered for a long time too.
Sure.
Before I was doing it myself. And the truth is, it's both. It's
Okay. Yeah.
you go out with something in mind, right? And so usually, like the producer or director that you're working with, often they will have storyboarded that sequence that they want in their episode, uh, and you go out there, but you also, everybody kind of understands that's just kind of that's our starting point. And the reality is we're working with wild animals, and there's a whole host of unpredictable variables. And so you go out and you shoot, you get what you get, and then you go back, and often the final product, it can look quite different than what you started with. Sometimes if things go exactly right, maybe it looks pretty similar to what you started with. But when you're in the field, you kind of have to make these decisions, just like um, usually there's some particular behavior that it's centered around, right? And so when you start, you're just trying to get the basics of it. Like, let's just get as much as we can of just like the fundamentals of that behavior. And then if we are in a good position and we feel like we have that, then we can start trying to build out these other little story beats. Yeah, and other times you just kind of you see something different once you get out there and you realize, oh, actually, like now that we're here on location, what's really happening looks quite a bit different than what we storyboarded, and that's going to be the story that we go with, and we kind of scratch it and go with that. So it's a very fluid process.
And that makes sense. I mean,
Yeah.
storytelling in general is often a process, right? And drafts and revisions and going back and modifying things. So yeah, I absolutely understand that. So snow leopard wise, so that was for Planet Earth 3, right?
Yeah, that's right. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I'm assuming with that, that was a lot of the camera trap technique.
It was, yeah, most of it was, yeah. Mm-hmm. I did a little bit of hide work there, but it was mostly, I had 26 camera traps out there. So a lot of cameras in a lot of places.
Yeah. And I think the nickname that I've often heard for snow leopards is like the ghost of the Himalayas. They're not exactly known for being easy to spot or easy to photograph or film or anything like that. So, I mean, what were some of the bigger challenges going into that to try to capture some of these shots?
You're right. They're notoriously difficult to see. I mean, even if you are right in front of one, like it's invisible. Once they sit down and they're kind of sitting still, they're so difficult to see.
Yeah.
And so, in that whole time, I only saw four. I think I had four or five different times where I actually had one in person.
Wow.
Right. So in a lot of that time, and those were very, very special moments, but the bulk of it was camera traps. And so, yeah, what you're doing is trying to figure out where they're going to be. Right. So cats, like, pumas are the same like this. Like they will have areas where they will scrape and they will leave a scent mark.
Yeah.
And then it's like kind of part of their like territorial marking. And so maybe different individuals who either live within the same territory or maybe they border each other will kind of visit these same sites. And it's kind of like, just like a signpost and kind of seeing who else is in the area. And so that was the key at first, was just a lot of hiking in these mountains, just trying to find where are these sites where you can see these scrapes and you can tell like they look pretty recent. And maybe there's like quite a few of them, so we can see there's likely different individuals have been coming here, and that's where I would start, is setting up cameras there. And so this was actually in the Gobi Desert, so it was like really dry, very dry, and so water, especially in the summer, like in August, was like a real limiting factor. And so that was the other key, was like finding these little pockets of water, because when there's not any snow in the mountains, there is no other place to get water. And so all the ibex, all the snow leopards, they're all going to go to these spots. And so those were kind of the two things I focused on to get started.
And in this time, are you staying, like, are you essentially like camping backcountry style, the entire time you're trying to get these shots? Or is it kind of like you have a base camp and you go out, every day or every few days or anything like that?
It's, I was living in a gear, so it's living kind of like there's no like real city here, right? It's just in the middle of nowhere, and so it's all nomadic people, and so they the Mongolians they live in these gears that they can break them down and then migrate with their herds seasonally, and so it's living just like that. And so we had actually like a gear camp that was set up, which was really cool. And that was kind of like our base camp. And so from there, we would just go. Uh, I could pretty much get to everywhere I needed to go from there with, taking a vehicle and then hiking. And then that was kind of like the central spot. So it wasn't like, uh, it wasn't, it was camping, but it was like, it was a solid base camp to work out of for that long. Yeah. Very cool experience to live in one of those.
Oh
They
gosh,
have a flap that opens up in the top so you
yeah.
can get some airflow, but also like at night when you're just laying down, you look up and see the stars and like, wow,
Wow.
the night sky down there is incredible.
I admit a little bit of envy there. That sounds amazing, like a wonderful experience. So you mentioned camera traps and how so you're not always super up close and stuff. Uh, and I know in terms of filming, people tend to have questions. My students have raised questions before, for example, like, how do they not interfere? How do the people who are filming the wildlife, how do they not interfere?
Mm-hmm.
How do they make sure that they are not influencing the behavior of the animals that they are observing? What goes into that?
Yeah. That's what we're always trying to do as well, because
Hmm.
like we can't, an animal that's scared doesn't make a very good subject for a sequence.
Yeah.
Now, if you're just trying to take a picture, maybe somebody can get a photo off, but if you're trying to actually film natural behavior, that's critical. You need them to be comfortable. So there's really two ways that works. So one is you're in a situation that you can be kind of accepted as part of the environment for the animal that you're working with. And so you just blend in like a fly on the wall. And there's, some species you're able to do that more than others. For example, like we were talking about bears a minute ago, like that's the type of thing where you can go out there and even if maybe they're bears that haven't been around you a lot, like these coastal bears in Alaska, you can kind of blend in and there's like, as long as you kind of follow their rules, play by the bear rules, you're okay. And you can sit there and film and get quite close and get completely natural behavior. Other times, like that's just not going to happen. If it's like cats, for example, are notoriously difficult to film, very secretive, and so you have to hide basically. And that can I would say like a camera trap is like a version of that, and then the other one is like we will sit in blinds. So like I spent a few weeks just sitting in a blind, like a hunter's blind, like a tent, um, and you just try to hide, and that way they don't know you're there, and maybe they kind of get used to the blind for a few days. They see it, and they're like, okay, now it's part of the environment, and then you're just hidden and tucked away in there.
Yeah, you've mentioned a couple times just like sheer durations, and that's something else I've wondered. Watching things, the way that I think we kind of inadvertently like just start to think about the natural world through viewing a lot of these documentaries is that like everywhere you go, uh, it's rich with life. Like there's just abundant life, and there's things everywhere. You could drop a camera in the ocean, and you're gonna find schools and torrents of fish and things. Is it like that at all anywhere that you have filmed, or is it hard to find wildlife? I mean,
Yeah, yeah. Um, it sure can be. I mean, part of when you're on these larger productions, you have like a whole team of people working, right? And so
mhm.
one person's job is like there's a researcher who it's their job is to kind of get all the background of these stories and make sure that whatever situation we're going into is like reasonably filmable. And so often we're not just going in kind of blind hoping that we might see something. We'll have something to go off of.
Yeah.
But definitely sometimes it just doesn't work out, and yeah, that can totally happen.
Yeah, so I remember a few years ago, I interviewed, I believe it was Dr. Kustub Sharma out in Nepal. He
Hmm.
researched snow leopards, and one of the things he had talked about was what they were hoping with the advent of a lot of these new AI technologies was using AI in conjunction with the camera traps to try and
Hmm.
make the process of filtering through the tons and tons of images easier. This is something blowing in the wind, and here's an ibex,
Yeah,
and okay, here we go.
yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
what do you foresee? Do you see any innovations coming along in terms of artificial intelligence with filming wildlife?
Well, it is really interesting especially when it comes to camera traps, because, like you're saying, snow leopards, for example. So, like some species can be you can identify individuals actually just from, like in that case, spots or certain facial markings. And
Sure. Yeah.
so, yeah, I think, I mean, from a research standpoint, I think that's a really exciting prospect to at some point you could just set out trail cameras and potentially a software would be able to do all this work that's taking, like the researchers so much time to go through and compare all the different spots and get the individual locations. But I think we have, in some digital cameras already, we're having some of this like facial recognition, and so it's happening fast.
Yeah.
For me, I do think that there will come a point that I will start incorporating it more in what I'm doing. Because for example, with a camera trap, you're having to basically envision the whole future, right, in advance.
Yeah.
And you have to do it with incredible accuracy from just where the camera is, right? You have to know exactly where to set up the shot and then where to actually to focus the camera. But then also you need to know the camera has to turn on from sensors that you set up around. So you have to kind of look around the area and think, okay, if I was a snow leopard, I would maybe walk in right here, or I would put my foot here. And then you put those sensors in those spots where you think the cat might come in. What would be really cool is to get to the point where the camera itself can see and know that's a snow leopard, and start recording. That would be incredible. I think at some point that will happen. The biggest issue with that right now is probably just power consumption, because this, we're talking about setups. I might leave in a remote location for several months at a time.
Sure.
So,
yeah.
But yeah, I think that we will definitely start seeing more AI uses.
Yeah. That would be amazing to be able to just, set up and it just starts, rather than just pure motion detection. It's, this is the animal you're looking for.
This is a snow leopard.
Here's the shot. That'd be so cool.
Yeah.
And then be able to say, this is that specific individual, that,
totally.
Amazing.
Yeah.
I mean, what has been for you, whether, pre-professional career or professional career? I mean, what have been some of your just top moments, favorite shots that you've managed to get, or favorite moments interacting with wildlife?
Oh man, that is such a tough one. I do think working with like camera traps is a very different experience from filming in person. Like, for obvious reasons, you're not actually there in the moment interacting with the animal. Yeah. And so I do really love shoots and jobs where I get to do that. I think you mentioned that show Big Beasts earlier on. That's on Apple TV, and that was, I spent a couple different summers up in coastal Alaska filming brown bears, and part of that was they sent us out to try to film a bear fight, which is like, we were like, okay, we'll try it, but it's like, it's actually not, to get like a full-on bear fight is actually quite difficult, because they're really good at avoiding conflict. Like, they have a lot of ways of resolving conflict before they actually get physical like that. Or if they do, it's usually over quite quickly. But we had these two big males that were very equally matched. And it all happened probably 30 yards from me, like right in front of me. I was like looking up at them. And they went for 15 minutes. It was the most insane. I think it certainly was the most adrenaline I've ever experienced. Like, they're just like, you're also like, you're like probably a little bit nervous, because like they're not going to attack you because they're completely focused on each other. But they might like run over you. So like you're a little bit nervous, but you're also just so having to stay focused on getting the shots, keeping everything in focus, making everything, make sure everything looks good. But I'll never forget the feeling I had as soon as it was over and I had stopped recording. I had just bottled up all of this adrenaline, and then it just hit me like a train. And it almost just knocked me down. It was crazy. But I think that it's in there. They cut it down in that show. It's obviously there's not time for a 10-minute bear fight in a 40-minute show. So it's down. They cut it down to a couple minutes, but you can get a sense of it. But it was just one of those moments where you feel so small, and you're just like overwhelmed by the power of nature. Just such a privilege just to be there as that's an example of one of those where you're kind of like a fly on the wall, and you actually do get to sit there and be part of the environment and observe. And that's always a really special experience.
You reminded me of something. I remember, gosh, I wish I could remember context. I think I saw There's a special that was looking at like specifically photographers for National Geographic, like the magazine back in the day. And there was this segment where they were photographing brown bears in Alaska, and the
Mm,
photographer had taken something like 3,000 pictures. And they got back into the cutting room and with the editor and stuff, and the process of trying to narrow it down to the one picture that was going to
yeah.
appear in the magazine. How much of what you capture ends up in the final product? I mean, is there a lot that just kind of gets left on the cutting board?
Oh, it's depressing. Yeah, a lot. I mean, so much. And often it will go to, some of it might still see the light of day at some point, like it
Hmm.
turns into archive for whatever company you're working for, and so other
Yeah.
shows might then pull on it. But yeah, I mean, snow leopards, like for example, that I had, what made the show was probably 25% of like the really solid stuff that I had in those 5 months, and so there's a
Yeah.
lot that so far only I have really seen, and then whoever's edited it. So yeah, it's yeah, there's a lot, and that's how, like the BBC, for example, just has a massive archive of footage.
Oh gosh. Yeah. I can't imagine their server size.
Yeah, no, it's
Yeah.
like, but at the end of the day, it's uh, what obviously has to make it is what fits the story best and what
Yeah.
helps the overall big picture. And so sometimes that's not the individual just epic shot that you maybe as a cinematographer are really attached to. Sometimes it
Hmm.
is, but sometimes it's not. And so you just kind of have to let that go.
What are like maybe some of the less glamorous, more challenging aspects of doing this kind of work?
I mean, it can be rough in the field. It's a
Mhm.
very physical job, depending on what you're working with. But like usually, it's pretty heavy gear, and you have to get it sometimes to play, like to the top of a mountain, for example.
Yeah.
And so it's just, yeah, it's definitely hard on the back, as I can attest, as I had a slip disc this winter from it. So it yeah, it takes its toll, and it's also long. Some of these jobs are just, even though it's an incredible experience, there's definitely like, being maybe a few months in a remote place, like, um has its challenges. Some of its mental challenges as well. I mean, all in all, I think it's a really good thing for you. But
I know there's a lot of people, myself included, who at some point in their life uh, dream about getting into this kind of work. Do you have any advice for people who whether it's just more of a casual approach to wildlife photography
mhm.
or trying to make a career out of it? Do you have any advice for people?
I would say, so. I answer that, I guess, in two parts. Maybe yeah, starting with just somebody who might want to just do this as potentially a hobby.
Hmm.
I think that is a great thing to do. Like for me, it has, even before I was working in this industry and just shooting stills, like it really becomes a lifestyle, and it's a way of getting you out into nature and connecting with nature and kind of getting in tune with the rhythm of nature, which is just, you can do that. You can go on a walk and do it. But for some people, I think having like some kind of creative outlet while you're doing that makes it a little bit easier to go out there and spend time, because your brain is a little bit more occupied. And so, yeah, I would just encourage anybody who is thinking about getting into wildlife photography, just to, there's a lot of really accessible cameras now, and
Hmm.
even like longer lenses that are not that expensive, where it used to be you had to spend, $14,000 maybe for a big lens. You can get like
Yeah.
a decent focal length that you could photograph wildlife at home or at a local park, for under, a couple grand. And so, which is not nothing, but it's more accessible than it was. And so, yeah, just speaking from personal experience, I think as just part of a lifestyle, it's really important. What I'm actually been working on over the past month, and we're hoping to have this done in probably, by mid-June, is myself and a close friend of mine who's a super talented photographer have been putting together, this nature photography course, an online course called Mastering Nature Photography.
Oh
And
wow.
it's kind of like an all-encompassing, like, there's stuff in there for people who have been doing it for years, but we really are trying to make it accessible and kind of coming at it from this angle that I'm talking about. That, like, I think a lot of people have really wanted to do some kind of nature photography, and they've just been intimidated by it.
Mhm.
Maybe photographers have talked like it's too complicated, or they just feel like for various reasons it's not for them. But we try to break it down and make it super accessible for everyone. We talk about what kind of gear you need, the fundamentals, and how we kind of think through light and composition and things like that out in the field. So that's a really exciting project for us. And yeah, maybe anybody who's interested in nature photography could check that out. It's yeah, masteringnaturephotography.com, but it's not live yet. We're still probably a month or two out from it. But
You said not mastery, but mastering, like ing.
uh, yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Mastering.
Okay.
Yeah,
Sure.
mastering nature photography. Yeah. And yeah, but to answer the other question about if you want to do it professionally, there are obviously a lot of different routes. What works for me, and it is like, I wouldn't lie, it's not an easy thing to get into because there are a lot of people who want to do it. But at the same time, whether you want to do this as photography or maybe as cinematography, there's also a lot of opportunity out there today, more than ever before. Like, even with social media, how it is now, like, there's a lot of opportunity for you to go out and do work and then get it seen, which can open a lot of doors for you. And so I think it's an exciting time to be trying to do some of your own projects. And what worked for me was actually doing my own personal project first and having my own story, which in the course of that, I kind of developed my own skills. I learned how to film, and I also learned how to think through a story. And I was able to actually pitch that story to a show. And the one thing there's a real shortage of always is stories. And so when people ask me that and they're really serious about it, that's my advice, is like, if you want to just wait for somebody to hand you an opportunity, that might happen, but it also might not. And so the best thing I think you can do is figure out a way to do your own personal project. Look, and you don't need to look far. Like, just look close to home, because there are all kinds of unique stories and unique wildlife stories happening everywhere. You just have to be observant and spend some time looking. And if you do something that's close to home, you have unique access to it. You don't need to go fly across the country to do something. You don't need to spend a ton of money to it. It's more about just getting out there, getting in nature, being attentive, being observant, and looking for whatever it reveals to you, and then just start filming it.
That's wonderfully said. I want to mention as well. I mean, of course, you don't only just film for these amazing series. You do a lot of wildlife photography. I looked through a lot of your prints. Your are they? I think it's ambrotypes.
Oh yeah, that was another
Just
project. Yeah,
stunning, absolutely
cool. Yeah,
gorgeous.
thank you.
And I'm
Yeah.
absolutely linking to your print shop in the episode notes. But like, what do you with your work? I mean, what do you hope? What do you hope that people who see it, what do you hope to convey? What do you hope to send as far as a message?
Mostly, I would just want my work to help people kind of reconnect with nature and the rhythm of nature. And like, we're just so disconnected from it in the world that we live in. And I think that it's just from even a mental health standpoint, like, the world and people would feel a lot better if they were able to just tap back into that a little bit. And so I obviously hope that it also inspires people to protect it, and to just come to appreciate it more. But I think, like, fundamentally, if people don't have an emotional connection to it, then all the other stuff that we are worried about it's a lot harder to get done. So we really, I think, in storytelling does this too. Like, that's what I love about just the natural history world, is that you're you're reaching a really broad audience with a story. And I think people's, maybe their ideological defenses and stuff, are they're not up as much when you're telling a story, as opposed to telling them this is how something should be, and you can connect with people emotionally. And so that's kind of the goal with all of my work. And
I will say, I'm not ashamed to say, I was like emotionally moved when I was looking at the amber types, especially. There's something about seeing, like, living
yeah,
wildlife in this kind of uh, older aesthetic, and then thinking about our changes in biodiversity and the extinction
yeah,
crises, and there was just something so potent about it that I just thought was really powerful. I was like, wow,
yeah.
this is just
Well,
beautiful.
that's great to hear. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's yeah, that particular project definitely had, like, it was this. that's what, like that's the earliest type of photography, right? Like the images that we have from the Civil War are ambrotypes, right? It's literally an image exposed onto a glass plate. And then it's, in like the cases, the ones you saw on the website, that's just a velvet, like a black background. And so it's just glass against that black background, and it becomes a positive image. If you were just to hold up that piece of glass, it would look like a negative, like you could make prints from it.
Yeah.
And so, it was just that kind of idea of like, what if I had this collection of work that just made you think, kind of like what you're saying, like almost like we do still have these animals. Like I live in a place that still has grizzly bears. We still have wolves. We still have bison, though just a fraction of what we used to have. Yeah. But imagine a world in which like that's all we had was just glass plates. Like, it just like looking at it as if it was history. Was really interesting just from an artistic standpoint to me. And also there's something about the fragility that glass conveys, right? Like some of them those plates are a little bit chipped. And like, to be honest, like quite a few of them broke as we were making them. And so I found that there was something really symbolic in that as well.
Yeah, I felt that like right away. So effective job.
Cool.
If that was the intent, cool. That's amazing. I know. So we're kind of on the tail end at the moment, and I know you have something that you have coming up here too. So I guess just before we wrap up, is there anything that you'd like to share?
I guess I would just leave it probably just encouraging people just to get outside and be an observer and a student of nature, and however you can do that. I mean, like I have received so many gifts in life just from doing that, personal and professional. And there's really something to it. And however you do that, whether that's with a camera, whether that's just as, going for walks, or maybe you record sound and listen to the sounds of nature. There's a lot of different ways to just get out there and immerse yourself in it. But I just really believe that it's a very beneficial thing for your well-being.
Yeah, there's definitely something to be said. A few weeks back, sat down with Cy Montgomery and talking about the Secrets of the Octopus special stuff. And
cool.
One of the things we were discussing is, a lot of, when it comes to conservation or doing something to positively impact the environment or something, there's a lot of one size fits all type narrative, but really, if you can connect to, your inner talents and passions and find a way to relate that then to the natural world, in ways that you can connect, there's something really powerful about that. And very clearly you have found and managed to do that in a truly astonishing way. So I thank you for the work that you're doing.
Thank you.
And the images that you are, blessing the world with and contributing. And like you said, growing up watching those things, and then now here you are, providing some of that same imagery to a kid somewhere who might one day grow up to, maybe do something like what you're doing. I think that's beautiful.
It's a blessing.
As always, thank you so much for listening. And thanks again, Jake, for joining me for today's conversation.
Yeah, enjoy.
If you'd like to learn more about Jake or check out his work or even purchase his photos, you can do that by checking out today's episode notes. If you'd like to be able to support The Wildlife for as little as $1 per month, you can do that at patreon.com/thewildlife. As always, stay curious, get outside, wander often, wonder always, and peace out, Rainbow Trout.